Zach Lahn joining me today, Republican gubernatorial candidate. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
So really excited to chat with you. You pride yourself in not being a politician, and now you're in this race for governor of Iowa.
Yeah.
Tell me just kind of what went into the thought process of running for governor.
You know, I think I've been involved in business and starting schools for a very long time. I now run our family farm today. You know, my family's been involved in agriculture in Iowa for 130 years. And so what really came up was, you know, there was a surprise that a lot of people had when we found that Kim Reynolds was going to be stepping down at the end of her term. And, you know, when my wife and I would talk about these things, I've been talking about these issues for a very long time, but not in context of running for office. It's more so in context of when are we going to do something about the large systemic issues that are facing our state? And so what went into it for me was, you know, I think I have the opportunity right now to give a voice to the Iowans that are talking to me about these issues, that are talking about them at their kitchen tables, at cafes, to actually put Iowans first over corporate interests, lobbyists, you know, special interests, and career politicians. And that's why I'm running.
So who is Zach Lahn? Because, you know, you haven't been in office before. So just kind of tell me who you are exactly.
Yeah, I'm a sixth generation Iowan. My family's been here since the Civil War. Actually, my great-great-great-grandfather was one of the Hawkeyes on horseback in the Civil War that Governor Kirkwood commissioned to go into and fight in the South. And our family's been here ever since. And so 1900, our family built a farm, a homestead. In 2005, it was sold. I actually bought that back in 2014 and restored it board by board, and call that home today. I'm a husband. I have 7 children. I grew up in western Iowa, just north of Sioux City. I graduated from Sioux City East High School, and so I'm an average Iowan, I would say, and I've been able to be involved in some really great efforts in companies and initiatives, and I'm wanting to bring that to the Capitol to start putting Iowans first.
For people who may say, you're an average Iowan, what makes you think, you can be the governor of Iowa? What would your response be to that?
I think the governor of Iowa should be an average Iowan. I think it's somebody that is at the cafe hearing what farmers are talking about, is actually in the field seeing what's going on, that has kids that are going to be growing up and have to compete against trillion-dollar hedge funds that are buying single-family homes in our state. I think that's why I'm running, is to give people like that a voice, to say, the deck is stacked, the system is rigged in many ways, and we need to start putting our state first and the people of our state ahead of some of these groups that have been getting so much in handouts and welfare, on the business side especially, that has been padding the pocket at the expense of the average Iowan. And so that's why I'm running. It's the whole reason I'm in this race. And so I think what Iowa needs is a little bit more of the common sense, because we're reaching that part of the discussion, meaning whether we're talking about our kids leaving the state, we're talking about our family farms dying off, education system being in the bottom half, or having the fastest rate of new cancer of anywhere in the history of the country, there's common sense here that tells us we know what's going on, and we need politicians who will stand up and fight on behalf of Iowans against these interests that are seeking to extract from our state.
And I want to get into a handful of policies that you want to advocate for, but I want to start with one that you've already brought up a handful of times, is you are an Iowa farmer and your goal is keeping Iowa farms in Iowans' hands. Yeah. Tell me a little bit more about that effort and what that kind of looks like if you were to be elected governor.
I think I have experienced this firsthand myself. I have bought land, I've been at auctions, I've bid against people from out of state that come in here. Often they're nameless and faceless. They have somebody bidding on their behalf. And we're now to the point, where at least a quarter of our state is owned by people who don't live here. And I'm not talking just about, grandma who moved to Arizona. I'm talking about out-of-state funds and investors that are buying land and also backing others to buy land. And they're raising the prices on land and on rental rates so that young farmers can no longer afford to get onto land. I mean, I tell people this all the time. It is not possible at current market prices for land or for equipment for somebody to start out and begin a new farm. We have seen this happen for years and years, to the point now that a full quarter of our state is owned by people who don't live here. And I truly believe myself that Iowa land should remain in Iowa hands. And especially when you're talking about these out-of-state interests that are just treating our state like an annuity. If you want an annuity, go buy an annuity. If you want to participate in the heritage and the culture of our state, move here. Come into our communities, farm the land, be a part of what it means to be an Iowan. We'd love to have you, but if not, leave this land and let us continue to get young people here, beginning their heritage in farming or continuing the family heritage of farming. But we're right now being priced out by consolidation and large interests that are treating Iowa as a place to extract from.
Taking on big ag and big pharma, a lot of what you're talking about, how do you do that? What does that look like from, a state level?
Well, I think it needs to be recognized this is part of the purpose of government. When I was growing up in Iowa, and we'll talk about agricultural here, but this applies to other industries too. And you mentioned pharma, it applies there. When I was growing up in Iowa, there were 300 companies selling seed, input, fertilizer, things like that to our farmers. Today, 3 companies control 85% of the market. They've reached the monopoly stage. And one of my favorite presidents was Theodore Roosevelt. He famously broke apart 2 of the largest companies at the time, JP Morgan and Standard Oil. And he used antitrust laws to do that. We have those same antitrust laws on the books today, and we need to be enforcing them. Just 2 weeks ago, a 3rd-generation Iowa company, Latham Seeds, filed an antitrust suit against Bayer, a giant conglomerate that has been using anti-competitive behavior to keep their business down. And I say this, that's bad enough. But when you think about how the state government of Iowa has given Bayer $42 million in subsidies and welfare, and what they're doing is then using it to extort an Iowa company, that's wrong. We need to enforce antitrust laws so we give farmers more competition, we give Iowa seed dealers and Iowa businesses more ability to thrive, and we start to lift our state up. Because right now, I tell people all the time, it's like there's a giant vacuum sound going out of our state. We're sending rent checks to people who don't live here or companies that aren't from here. We see in Des Moines, Iowa today, Blackstone is buying up single-family homes, and Iowa's young families are having to compete with a hedge fund that has $1 trillion. And then when they do buy those homes, when this hedge fund does that, Iowa's young families are renting it from them. It's just wrong. And the beauty of the Constitution is that the 10th Amendment says we get to determine how we live as a state. I want it to be a state where we put the people of Iowa over these interests.
I want to move on to education. You say you want to make Iowa #1 in education again. What would you do differently to make that happen?
I think when we look at education, I think the common debate is often around the education savings accounts and this public versus private. I've been very clear. I think education savings accounts are foundational freedom that we should have. Parents should have more freedom over where their kids go to school and more freedom over where their tax dollars are spent. But I think one thing I've been encouraging Republicans on especially is that, I'm an outsider, so I'm not listening to what leadership might say I need to say or anything like that. I'm bringing things that I think that makes common sense and the people of Iowa want. The governor of Iowa has got to be the #1 advocate for public school kids in the state. Has to be. So what would I do differently? I think it's very clear. #1, I want our public schools to be so good that people aren't looking for other alternatives. I want parents to have something they should be able to count on, which is a good school to send their kids to. The governor can create innovation zones in the state, and you can free up Iowa's superintendents, principals, and teachers to be able to innovate in the classroom. There are so many different models out there. I've spent 2 years of my life traveling the country visiting schools. To start schools, I've spent 8 years beginning schools. We now have a network of over 300 around the country. There's so many innovative methods out there that we should be adopting and teachers want to adopt. I want to empower them to be able to do that. And that'd be the first step I would take. Also, I would like to go into the schools that are performing the absolute lowest, the bottom 5%. The governor has special authority then. And I would like to work with those schools to show what can be done when we implement these innovative practices and we work to meet children where they're at and serve their needs. But the last thing I'll mention about this is that, I have 2 great grandmothers and a great aunt that were one-room schoolhouse teachers. We have a rich heritage of public schooling in our state. But right now, you talk to an educator, 95% of their time is spent with 5% of the students. We need off-ramps for those students that are not punitive, that help them to have the needs that they're crying out for help on met. And often it could be malnutrition, they could have parents going through a really hard time, they could be sleeping in a car. The teachers are not behavioral therapists. We need off-ramps for one-on-one and small group care to help restore and bring these kids back into the classroom to learn like they'd want to learn.
And you have a lot of ideas supporting public schools. I think a big argument that people often push back on, and we see every year at the State House, is state supplemental aid and schools wanting more than what the state is giving them. Would you increase the state supplemental aid for Iowa's education system?
Well, I think the first thing we have to look at, I spend a lot of time in business. The first thing we look at is results. When the 1990s we were #1 in education. Today we're in the bottom half. And by the way, we had that entire drop before ESAs even began. And so We've also increased per pupil spending something like 200% over that time. So we are increasing funding and decreasing quality. Before you increase funding more, you have to fix the problem. And that's what I'd be focused on. And I think that's what teachers would really want me to be focused on, because we've been spending more and we're getting worse results. We have to fix the underlying problem, which I think are these things I'm talking about, innovation in the classroom, working on behavior and discipline issues that are coming up, supporting teachers in that way. And then once we understand how are we going to build better in our schools, then we look at what's the financial need that's needed there, and how do we meet that?
I want to move on to talking about Iowa's rising cancer rates and water quality. I think you also mentioned that at the beginning too, something I'm sure you've been hearing a lot on the campaign trail. What does it look like if you are governor in terms of addressing that?
I say that this is actually one of my 4 key points. I cannot go to any event now because I've been talking about this so much without a line of people talking to me about how cancer's affected their life. It affected my life. My own father got non-Hodgkin's lymphoma after spending his life in the fields. I think that this is a big, deep systemic issue that cannot be ignored. Number one, I've been very clear about this. I believe for a very long time we've been lied to by big agricultural companies about the safety of their products. I don't even think that's in question anymore. I think we have so much evidence of that. Now it's about holding accountable. So number one, there should never be immunity from lawsuit for a company. No company should have immunity from liability when their product harms somebody. I have been very thankful that they pulled that out of the Farm Bill. I would veto any bill that would come to my desk that would attempt to give a pesticide company liability from lawsuit. And number two, we have to do independent research about the safety of products so our farmers know they have real science backing it, because the EPA has been a captured agency for a very long time. But the third thing is the water quality issue is severe. And high nitrate load in water is one of the top causes of colorectal cancer. That's one of the fastest killing cancers that we have today. And so we need to look at solutions both in urban settings and rural settings to decrease the amount of runoff that we're having go into our water supply. I've called for saturated buffers to be installed and incentivized on agricultural land, which would decrease, as the Bear Creek project said, 100% of the nitrate load when it's installed, and they're very cost effective. Also for tax credits for different types of nitrogen application on farms to get it deeper into the soil so you lose less, which by the way, benefits farmers because they have to use less product. They have to spend more with these input companies that are consolidated and are monopolizing their interest. And they also will have less go into the tiling lines and end up in streams. It just wins, but we're at a point where it's no longer about one side versus the other. It's about solving this for Iowa's kids and Iowa's citizens.
Would you increase funding for research and advocating for this? I'm open to increasing funding, but I also think we know what's going on. I think we're at this point of common sense where we understand that Iowa's an outlier in these things. And so when we're an outlier, we look at outlier conditions. What I'd like to see, we have maybe the best medical research hospital in the country. We also have the best agriculture college in the country. I would love to see the University of Iowa, directed by me with the Board of Regents, I'd like to see them focused on solving the cancer crisis in our state. And I'd love to see the Iowa State University have a directive to focus on solving the looming agricultural issues that we have and the cliffs that we're facing in the ag industry to stop bankruptcies from happening. That's Iowa First. It's saying, our universities don't need to be focused on global problems. We have enough problems right here that they can help us solve. So this is probably one of the top priorities in my administration. You can have low taxes, which I'm in favor of, low regulation, but if your kids are leaving and your people are dying, you're not winning. We have to solve these problems. Let's talk about eminent domain. The fight's going to continue into the next legislative session. Where do you stand on eminent domain, and what do you tell landowners who are really passionate about this topic and have been advocating for years now for it?
I think that number one, with me as governor, it's very simple. I will not allow eminent domain for private gain. The state constitution says no eminent domain for private gain. So does the Republican Party platform. So do most of the House and Senate. They say that. But what we've had happen here is a special interest has captured a board. And maybe more than one interest has captured a board. And so now they're doing the bidding of a company, and it's adverse to the constitution of our state. So as governor, I'll do everything in my power to stop that, even if it means overturning the board, to put in place property rights advocates that want to protect the people of Iowa. But I would just say this too, we have to just get a solution to this problem very soon, and it needs to have private property rights at the top of the list of what we're advocating for and protecting, because we have big issues that we need to start tackling that I've talked about. And this is one that should have been solved already, because there's a right way to do this and a wrong way to do this. We've been doing it the wrong way. We just need to do the right thing for the people of Iowa and move on to solve these big issues.
Well, there's clearly a difference in the House and the Senate when it comes to eminent domain. If you're governor, how would you navigate those conversations and getting it across the finish line to your desk?
Yeah, I think it comes down to a couple things. One, you have to be a good negotiator. You have to understand what are the incentives at play here. And I would like to do that. The first thing I'd like to do is just work with people to say, how do we get this done and solved in the right way? And the good news is I've been hearing that there is solutions that would not allow eminent domain to be used that both sides might be open to. And so I don't think we're that far away. Communication is a big part of this. So often people are siloed off and they're not talking to each other about these things, when we could probably sit in a room at a table and figure out a solution to this and just be done with it. But at the top of this list as a non-negotiable has to be the property rights of the citizens of Iowa. That's why so many of our ancestors came to Iowa in the first place. It was not for religious freedom. We had it already. It was for an end to feudalism. We wanted to be able to own the ground under our feet. And so this is sort of directly adverse to the reason that we have what we have in our state, why our ancestors came here. And I would be advocating for that heavily.
You align a lot with the Make America Healthy Again movement. The legislature just passed Governor Reynolds' version of that bill. Tell me why that's a passion in your campaign, some of the top priorities in that movement for you, and if you would go farther than what was just passed in the state legislature.
Yeah, I'm the first candidate to ever be endorsed by the Make America Healthy Again organization, which is, as fighting for Bobby Kennedy's principles in Washington, D.C. And they chose Iowa as their first endorsement ever. I think there's many reasons why. We've talked about some of them. But when I look at this, I see the opportunity that we have as a state. I think what Governor Reynolds has passed is a great start. I love the start that it's put forward. I think it's helping with healthier food, healthier kids in schools. I think there's some great principles there. But I'm looking at large systemic change that we also need to be making. So for instance, I'm calling for 80% of the food served in Iowa schools to be grown in Iowa. We can grow nutrient-dense, healthy food for our kids and replace a lot of this non-nutrient dense food that's coming into our schools being trucked in from thousands of miles away. We can replace it right here. And that would not only help our kids be healthier, but what it also do is it help create new markets for farmers that want to do things differently and smaller operators that want to serve their community. I think the Make America Healthy Again movement encompasses a lot of that. It encompasses, less medications for kids. That's an educational issue too. I mean, look, new models of education don't expect young 7-year-olds to be in a desk for 6 hours a day. And then when they can't sit still, that they need to be medicated. Less medication for kids, healthier food, safe ingredients. Right now, our country may have upwards of 10,000 approved food ingredients, where European countries have somewhere around 400. And a lot of this is driven by industry. The government has a role to play in this to help make sure that what we're allowing to be grown, served in our schools and for our kids, we need to make sure that it's safe. And so that's a big priority for me in what I'm doing, is to bring that Iowa First, Make America Healthy Again type of agenda to all sorts of aspects of governing.
And then I want to talk about another hot topic, that is abortion. We saw the fetal heartbeat bill be passed a couple sessions ago, where just this session saw more restrictions on abortion medication and how Iowans can receive that. Would you go further if you're elected governor, and what do you want to see when it comes to abortion in the state?
I've been very clear about being pro-life, and I've no apologies for that. I'm very proud to be pro-life. I think the heartbeat bill is the right direction. I think that we could do more to protect life. Just as a general principle, we shouldn't be allowing abortion pills in the mail, period. That's something where you need to be face-to-face with a doctor to talk to them about that. But I would say this, that I think for a long time we've talked about this idea of protecting life from conception to natural death. And we focus so much on this side of it, but we're not paying attention to the fact that natural death is coming earlier and earlier for Iowa citizens. So when I look at this, I look at the other pieces of this as well that are pro-life. Lowering our cancer rates is pro-life. Getting nitrates out of water is pro-life. I believe personally that pulling the COVID shots off the market is a pro-life issue. We've seen 10 times the amount of VAERS reports of adverse effects from the COVID vaccine than the average vaccine. It needs to be restudied and pulled. And that's a life issue. But also, we're at a place now where Iowa citizens are going to funerals for people who are 65, whose parents live to be 80. We're losing the wisdom of a generation. This is what the Make America Healthy Again agenda is all about, is how do we live longer, not just longer, but longer, healthier lives. And so the lens through which you view the state when you're governing makes a big difference. That's the lens through which I'm viewing this, is how do we make our state healthy for the long term? How do we support our children, make public education better, lower the cancer rates, and keep Iowa's kids in Iowa? I think these are just common sense issues that right or left, I think you agree with.
You are in a crowded Republican primary, a few weeks out. What sets you apart from the other GOP candidates?
I would have to say that it's the issues we're taking on, the reason we're running is long-term systemic issues. Like I said, I'm all for low taxes and low regulation. I think the legislature has done a pretty good job at that. We can make life more affordable, and we should try to do that when we can. But at the same time, we have to grow. We have to keep our kids in Iowa. We have to make education great in Iowa. And we need our citizens living longer, healthier lives while our farms, small family farms, are thriving. And so I look at those issues, like I said, it doesn't matter if you're left or right. Those are issues you care about. Your kids staying here, your family farms thriving, your education being number one, and low cancer rates. So I believe these are just Iowa issues, and that's what we're running our campaign on.
And you're up against one person in that GOP primary, Randy Feenstra, who has statewide name recognition, being a current representative. How do you navigate that, him having that name recognition?
I think Iowa's a grassroots state, and we are going around right now, we're having town halls, on average of 100 people are showing up to our town halls. They're hearing a different message and a different vision about the future of Iowa. And I think the more people that are hearing that, whether it's at town halls, on TV, on radio interviews, and different types of media, the more people we're finding coming to our team. This is a long-term effort to change the landscape of the state of Iowa and turn it back over to the people of Iowa. And so I think people are resonating with that message. Again, I'd say this, that Iowa's not a place where voters can be bought. They really want to look you in the eye. They want to understand where you stand. And I'm finding that even though we're bringing up new issues, they're saying, finally somebody's talking about this. They're talking about with their friends and neighbors. They're talking about the cafe. Finally, somebody's talking about breaking up the agriculture monopolies or stopping these groups from buying homes out from under the feet of our kids. We're here to defend the people of Iowa, and I think that's what Iowans want.
And if you are elected as the Republican candidate, you'd be up against Rob Sand. Tell me, what would set you apart from Rob Sand in that race?
Well, I think there's many things that would set us apart, but I think it's also just being very upfront about why you're running and why you're in your race. I'm not depending on a poll to tell me what I should run on. I understand what Iowans are facing, and I understand that because I talk to them and I care, and I talk to them before getting into this race. This isn't just a stepping stone. This is an effort that I'm getting into to try to defend the people of the state. And I think that there's been big talk about Republican versus Democrat in this. I think that's divisive. I really think we're running our campaign on Iowa issues, and they're just common sense issues that Iowans want to see tackled. But the big issue here, I would say, is that it's who are you answering to? And I'm answering to the people of Iowa. I'm not looking for big donors from corporations or anything like that. I'm not accepting that money. I'm mostly self-funding our campaign, and we have a lot of small dollar donors, and we're doing that so we can advocate on behalf of the people.
Couple weeks till the primary. Any final messages for Iowans?
I would just say June 2nd is the primary. We need to vote. We have to show up. And I would say, as you're looking at who to vote for, I think we need to think about not just what's best for the next year or two, but what is going to set Iowa apart for the next 20, 30, 40 years. And I believe as you look at that, I hope you'll see that that's what our campaign is all about.
Awesome. Well, Zach Lahn, thank you so much for joining us today. Really appreciate your time.
It was great. Thank you.